Hey everyone, what is up, and welcome back to another episode of the Lifestyle Lifter Show. I'm your host, your online transformation coach, Adrian McDonald, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jeff Hoehn. Jeff is a certified strength conditioning coach. He's a master's in human performance and nutrition, and he is the host of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Jeff, welcome to the Lifestyle Lifter Show, my man.
Awesome, Adrian. Yeah, thanks, man, for having me on. I know we've known each other for years now, and it's cool to be able to connect on here and chat on the podcast. And like I said, I'm honored to be on the show.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. So before we get going about body recomposition, building muscle, toning up, looking your best for summertime, share a bit about yourself, Jeff. That just share about your backstory so that people can learn a bit more about you and what got you into fitness in the first place.
Yeah, man. So I've been coaching for probably 7 to 8 years now. It was like a little bit in person to start. Now I've fully switched to online, so I work just in an online capacity now with clients. As that's the way to go, right? You're able to reach a lot more people that way and connect, on podcasts and things like that. As far as my background in fitness, so I started picking up weights when I was like 12, like had my dad's dumbbells, doing push-ups, it was all upper body focus, for a while. Then I played sports, in high school. And so, got into a little bit more lifting there. Wasn't really a huge fan of it for like sports. I kind of wanted to just focus on uh hanging out with my boys and going after girls, on the weekends and stuff like that. That was kind of what I look forward to. But then, when I got out of high school, man, I really fell in love with it. It became a part of my day, and really haven't looked back since. I've done a couple like natural bodybuilding shows in the process, and then pretty much have just kind of gone full force into learning everything I can about, nutrition, like you said, fat loss, muscle growth. And that's pretty much how my days are structured now at this point. So I just kind of love it. My goal really is to just continue to build as much muscle as I can and, just find ways to help apply those to clients as well too. And, not getting any younger at this point. So, learning how to also, stay injury free in the process. And again, I know this was something you said you potentially wanted to talk about, but, keeping these results long term as well too is super important. So just a little background on me there. Hopefully that was helpful. I don't know if there's anything else you want to follow up there with that.
Yeah, no, awesome, awesome. That's all really super helpful, just so our listeners learn a bit more about you, Jeff. And Jeff, you're from St. Louis, Missouri, is that right?
Yep, right smack in the middle of the USA, man. So it's about 3 hours from flight both ways to get to either coast. But yep, in the middle in the Midwest. I always tell people if you don't have family here or you don't have a work trip here, you're probably not going to ever come to St. Louis, Missouri. But yeah, we have the Arch. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, like overseas or anything like that, or outside of the state. But we have the Arch. It's like a kind of this arch thing that's supposed to be like the gateway to the West, basically. So
Amazing,
that's
man.
what we're known for. So yep.
Deadly, deadly. And Jeff, something you're known for on a personal standpoint, professional standpoint also, is mastering body recomposition, which is the process of building muscle and losing fat simultaneously. Jeff, as of this episode being uploaded, we are roughly 12 weeks away from the start of summertime. I know a lot of people now, they want to be going on holidays, they want to feel confident with their top off, they don't want to be the ones with the sun coming down and then covering themselves up or feeling uncomfortable. We all want to look leaner. We all want to look fitter during the summertime. So for anyone looking to get in shape for summer and then being able to maintain those results long term, Jeff, let's just maybe start out with nutrition. Like, what are some practical implementation strategies that we could use to get there?
Yeah. So if we're going to talk, specifically like from a body recomp standpoint, like you said there, body recomp, like you said, that kind of losing body fat and building muscle. And I kind of like to break this down into two distinct things where we have like a short-term body recomp where it's, you lose body fat and build muscle at the same time, right? Like that's the perfect, that's what everyone wants, right? They want to be a little bit leaner. They want to build a little bit more muscle. And so that's kind of the what I call short-term body recomp, right? This is where, again, you can do those at the same time. And there's specific conditions within that are going to be super helpful, for you to be able to get there, to be able to do these at the same time. I think one kind of thing around that a lot of people think is it's not possible, right? It's like, that's too good to be true. But, you know, as we kind of look into it a little bit more, it's actually a lot more possible in a larger population than people think, right? So I'll kind of
For
briefly go over
sure.
that, and then I'll kind of tie in the nutrition aspect to all this. So people that are able to do that a little bit more are going to be people who, maybe haven't lifted weights for very long, right? They're going to be in a great spot to do that. If you have higher body fat levels, right? So maybe you're somebody who's like trying to decide between, hey, should I build muscle first or lose body fat first? Well, if you're somebody who has higher body fat levels, you're able to do both at the same time there with that. Maybe you're somebody who's coming off like an injury or a long layoff from the gym, but you used to train a lot. Like you're in a good spot here to be able to lose body fat and build muscle. And then the one that kind of surprises people is, maybe you are somebody who's been training for a while, right? So, and you're like, well, I've just been doing it for a while. Like I can't body recomp. I've been training for 5+ years. But what I find, and what I find when a lot of clients come to me is they're missing at least one to two of the pieces of, we have the training side of things. Maybe they've been training, but it hasn't necessarily been geared towards building muscle as optimally as they could be, right? So it's like maybe they're lifting weights, but they're not progressively overloading. Maybe they're doing too much training volume, or they could like improve their execution, right?
Sure.
From a nutrition standpoint, which kind of goes into your question here, maybe they're off from a protein standpoint. Maybe they're not eating enough protein. Maybe
Yeah.
they're eating a little bit too much. Or maybe they're not eating enough. They're not fueling their body enough. They're not putting it in a good spot to want to build muscle. And then we have things outside of the gym, right? So things like sleep, stress management, those are big things that people often overlook as well. Maybe their sleep's off, or maybe their stress is super high compared to, the amount of training that they're doing. So I usually find that somebody's doing well at least in maybe one or two of those, but then they've never tied all of them together at the same time, right? And so uh, maybe you've been training for a while, but training can improve, nutrition can improve a little bit. And it's like you have some runway here to be able to lose body fat and build muscle at the same time, right? Um, and so again, a lot of people are when they come to me, those are the people that can improve, or they have the biggest room to body recomp. There is they can just improve something out of those things that I just talked about. And then lastly, we have a long-term body recomp, which at some point people are going to have to go to. And that's where you lose muscle, or you build muscle and lose body fat over longer periods of time, right? At that point, we're probably going to have to go into more dedicated phases of fat loss, more dedicated phases of building muscle there with that. So that was kind of my summary of body recomp first. Did you have any follow-ups to that, or do you want me to go back to the question around nutrition and we can
No,
kind of
no,
talk
that
about that?
no, absolutely. Like literally everything you said there, I'm with you on all of that 100%. That typically body recomp, newbie gains, someone who might be detrained or they lay off with injury. As you said, maybe like someone with that skinny fat physique often is a common
Yeah,
one. And probably one other element too. But Jeff, you and I don't need to worry about this. Is let's be real, if you're taking testosterone and
that
you're
too.
taking steroids, yeah, you're probably in a better position to be able to lose fat and build muscle simultaneously. But we're just speaking to the vast majority of people who are just natural here, Jeff. So when it
Yep.
comes to so like doing a body recomp, getting in shape, looking your best, what would you say first of all from your own professional standpoint are some common misconceptions people have when it comes to their nutrition?
Yeah, so common misconceptions around nutrition. So I think one, it's, they think that they need to just eat as little as possible if they're trying to like fat loss, like if they're trying to lose body fat, right? It's like, hey, I just need to, just eat chicken, broccoli, and rice, and that will certainly help. But I think again, there's not enough like kind of flexibility there with that. And I think a lot of times people often under fuel themselves when they kind of come from that mindset, right? And then again, our two goals of a body recomp are to lose body fat and build muscle. And you may lose some body fat in that process, but you might you're probably not putting yourself in the best position to build muscle in that process, right? So I think under fueling and just kind of being in this like super restrictive mindset around nutrition. Like I know I used to do that when, 10 plus years ago when I wanted to lose body fat, it was just like, oh, I just need to eat super clean and just find the lowest calorie items. And then you end up like not being fueled enough to build muscle, right? And you may have some micronutrient deficiencies, right? You may be missing out on essential vitamins and minerals. You may be completely neglecting a macro, whether that be carbohydrates or protein, right? Something might be super low there with
Sure.
that. And you're just not putting your body in the most optimal position, right? That it feels good there with that. So I think a big kind of misconception is thinking that, if you want to get lean, you just need to eat very little amounts. And, as you know, you've done a bodybuilding show, like there might be a period of time when you need to eat a really small amount to get super shredded and to get super lean. But we just don't want that to be something that we do all of the time 24/7, right? There's periods of time where maybe you do push it a little bit more, but we also want to make sure that we are fueling ourselves enough there with that. And so that's kind of one big misconception. I don't know if you have any follow-ups to that or anything.
Yeah, no, man, I'm with you. And I really like the approach that you kind of mentioned there, that with a lot of people, it's actually addition rather than subtraction. That if you just focus on adding a bit more protein, add a bit more fiber, often people think that they're eating a lot of food, but they're just eating a lot of volume. And volume eating, I know, is a very effective strategy, whether you are particularly doing a body recomp, because the goal should be to eat as much food as possible while staying within your calories. And, a good way is to have a high protein, lean protein sources at every meal, lots of micronutrients, lots of fiber, as you kind of mentioned there as well, Jeff. When it comes to then calculating your calories for that body recomp, what's a practical standpoint for most people? I know there's no one size fits all, but just some general guidelines here.
Yeah, so let me pull up my exact number here for maintenance. So like what I like to do is for this, so when we're going for a body recomp, I do think it really does depend on where the person is at specifically. But say you are somebody who, you kind of want to maximize both, right? And say you are in that maybe you have a little bit of body fat to lose, you still need to build some muscle. I think the best place to be in for a body recomp to start would be a small calorie deficit, okay?
Yeah.
And rather than looking at like your exact calorie number, like the deficit you need to be in, what I like to do and how I like to go through this process is let's find a good baseline of around your maintenance calories, right? So you
Sure.
can either do this by taking your body weight and multiplying it by 12 to 15, right? So whatever your
Yeah,
body weight is, multiply that by 12 to 15. That's a good just kind of baseline. You can
absolutely.
also use macro calculators online too to just again get a baseline. Now, within that though, there is going to have to be some trial and error with that, okay?
For
So
sure.
just because these calculators will get you within the ballpark, but it's not going to be like it may not be accurate for you, right? How much energy somebody expends throughout the day is very genetic and individual there with that. So what I like to do is get a baseline, and then we take 2, 3, 4 weeks to kind of see where their weight's trending, and that gives us a good idea of where they're at, right? If your weight stays relatively stable on average over 2, 3, 4 weeks, you're likely at your maintenance, right? You know where that's at. If it's trending up, you're in a somewhat of a surplus, right? So you'll need to
Absolutely.
find ways to either increase your activity or reduce your the amount of food you eat. If it's trending down, you're in a deficit. So again, we use this. I don't know if I gave you a number, but I think 12 to 15 is a good kind
Yeah.
of number there on that. So we get that baseline and then we make adjustments. From there, what I like to do is monitor their body weight and their caloric intake, and we want to try to aim for like a 0.25 to 0.5% of body weight loss per week. So if you're sorry, I'm gonna use American numbers here. So
Yeah,
170
let's
pounds.
go ahead, man.
If you're 170 pounds, we're looking at about zero point 0.4 to zero point 0.8 pounds of weight loss per week, right? So I like to go
Yeah,
off of trends to see where their body weight's going because again, that's going to make it very individual. If you're not hitting those numbers there, we'll make an adjustment from either a caloric standpoint uh, or an adherence standpoint or a movement standpoint, right?
for
So
sure.
I like to get people in a small calorie deficit for a body recomp initially, right? And the biggest reason for that is you know, if we want to lose body fat, we do want to send some sort of, we want to be in a calorie deficit. So you do want to see your weight trend down. However, from a muscle building standpoint, if our deficit is too big, right, we're losing weight too quickly. You're not going to put your body in great position to build muscle at that point, right? So we can be in a small calorie deficit to elicit the fat loss, but also that small calorie deficit will be enough to put you in a solid spot to build muscle as well too there with that. So that's how I would do it typically. If you do have a lot of muscle already, but you still want to kind of see a recomp, maybe we'll put you closer to maintenance and we kind of want to see your body weight maintained there with that. So hopefully that was
Absolutely.
helpful there.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Like such a great point for anyone doing that body recomp. The most important thing, as Jeff alluded there, is that when you're dropping the fat, you want to maximize your fat loss and minimize your muscle gain, because otherwise you just become a smaller, skinnier, fat version of yourself, and nobody wants that look either, Jeff. I'm curious, what's your preferred macro split for someone doing a body recomp? Would it be like a
Yeah.
40, 40, 20 protein, carbohydrate, fat, or again, I know it would vary individual to individual, but just even your own personal preference, Jeff.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I think how I typically do this is we'll look at, so I don't really go off of splits. What I'm typically looking at is, okay, what's their calorie amount? And then from there, we're going to go off of minimum. I like to hit minimums for
Yeah,
certain macros. Okay. So for protein, we're going to go around 1 gram per pound of body weight. So again,
yeah,
I think I think that would be 2.2 kilograms per, I think is what that would translate
yeah.
to. Sorry, I'm not great at those
Yeah, no
conversions.
worries. Yeah, no, in that that's what I always say, like 2 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So 1 pounder, 2 to 2.2 grams, all good there, Jeff. Keep going, man. You're doing awesome.
Yeah, so that's the minimum for protein, and then from there we're going to make sure we're at a minimum of about 20% of your body weight for fat. So again, if you're 170 pounds, 20% of that would be I think 30, like around 34 grams, and then so that's the minimum from there. And then I like to, in a body recomp, get a minimum of 1 gram per pound of body weight for carbohydrates is a
Yeah,
minimum, right? And those are our minimums that we're hitting. And from there, we'll whatever we have left over from the calories left over, we'll throw those towards whatever macros the client can stick to and enjoys, right? Ideally, it would be at this point probably carbohydrates, so that way they have enough energy to really push their training. But
I
it
like
does
that.
depend. If they like to eat a little bit higher fat, maybe we'll add in a little bit more fat. If they by chance like going higher protein, that's an option as well too. We just want to make sure that like protein doesn't get so high that now it's taking away from carbohydrates or fats, right? Because if your
Sure.
carbs are too low, that's probably not going to be great from a training perspective. Um, you know, Carbohydrates can help with recovery. They give you energy for training. So that's how I typically do it, right? It's a combination of let's hit minimums, but then from there, let's see what the client likes, and then whatever's left over, we kind of go from there. So I try to be somewhat flexible with that, just because again, I have found that to be most helpful from a long-term sustainability consistency aspect.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you. And speaking of sustainability, nutrition is often, from my own coaching perspective, where most people have the biggest amount of challenges, Jeff. It's not necessarily the hour in the gym, it's the 23 hours outside of that. And you alluded to it already, from an adherence standpoint, that's going to be most important. So, what are some practical ways to help increase someone's adherence to their nutrition so that they're able to hit their daily metrics, their daily calories, protein, carbs, etc., on a consistent basis?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things you can do. I'll start with first, I think having some sort of plan each day. I think if you go into it just kind of winging it, kind of doing a if it fits your macros approach, and you're just going to kind of, I like to call this a reactive tracker where they just eat and then they track food, right? I think that's the first thing you can do is have some sort of game plan for the day, okay? And whether you plan that out for the week or just the night before you plan it out, whatever it is, having some sort of game plan for the day, I think is the first thing you can do to actually
Awesome.
stick to your macro goal, right? Or calorie goal. There with that. Another thing I like to do is, and this can go back to planning, but I like to set up a structure with clients where they eat about the same amount of meals per day. I understand that, maybe you can't do that every single day, but if we can set a good baseline of like, hey, you're going to eat 3 meals per day or 4 meals per day, whatever it is, I think that can be super helpful because again, it takes a lot of the guesswork out with it. And as there's going to be some hunger involved when you're dropping body fat. And a lot of times a big reason people fail is because they're just super hungry. And so by having like a set amount of meals per day, we're able to, one, they know when their next meal's coming, right? They know that, hey, I still have 2 meals for today, so they have a general idea what that looks like. But then two, we can find a meal timing strategy and like how many meals you eat per day that keeps you feeling as satiated as possible throughout the day, right?
I like
Whereas
that,
if
man.
it's like one day you eat two meals, that day you're probably going to be a little bit hungrier. Then the next day you eat 4 meals, maybe you're going to be less hungry, right? So if we can kind of work on that that structure from day to day, and have like that's one thing that I like to do there with that. So I would say those are the two biggest.
Yeah.
Another thing I like to do is, instead of being kind of, again, overly restrictive with calories and macros, instead of having clients hit exact numbers, I like to kind of give them a range, right? And that range can be a calorie range, it can be a macro range. So giving them some ranges, just to give them a little bit of flexibility from day to day there, to where they don't feel like they need to like hit this exact number each and every day, right? Because I think the big thing is we want to get you within we want to get you within the ballpark. We just don't want you to be all over the place. So
Sure.
I like to
Yeah.
do ranges. So depending on the phase that they're in, from a nutrition perspective, it could be a little bit of a higher range. It could be a little bit of a lower range in terms of like maybe it's 100 calorie range, maybe it's a 200 calorie range, maybe it's 10, we want to be within 10 grams of our protein, or maybe it's 20. And I think it also depends on the client and what they, what about them. Because again, some people are going to be better with a little bit more flexibility. Some people aren't
Yeah.
going to be as good with flexibility, right? So I think knowing your client and knowing when and how to kind of pull those levers and how flexible you want to be with them is, it's all part of the coaching process. But those are a few things. And again, that allows for more flexibility from day to day, right? So maybe they have an event or they have a really hard training day. Well, then maybe they're going to eat a little bit more calories that day. And then another day they don't have an event, they're maybe a little less active. Well, maybe that's a day where you eat just a little less food on that day, right? And at the end of the day, what you do over the week and over weeks is going to be the most important to, really change your body composition there with that. So those are a few strategies. We have some other kind of smaller strategies that you can potentially implement. Diet breaks, refeed days as well too, to kind of help with adherence. Again, there's no magic to them in terms of like fat loss or anything like that, but they can be helpful from a mental perspective. And the research, people that do like these diet breaks where they take either a couple of days off of dieting, go back to their maintenance, or they take multiple weeks, they have found to not have as much like diet fatigue at the end, diet fatigue being things like high hunger levels, low energy, stuff like that.
Sure.
Very food focused as well too, right? So those are a few ways there to help kind of with the sustainability and consistency.
Oh man, amen to everything you said there. I heard Nick Bear say this in his podcast during the week, and I love the idea. You're alluding to it as well. Forward thinking, backward planning. As you said, having a plan in place. And something I like to say to my clients is don't go to bed without knowing what you're going to eat the following day. Just it doesn't even mean you have to have your meals prepped, but at least have a meal plan in place. So you know what you're going to have for breakfast, what you're going to have for lunch, dinner, and so on. So you're not just eating on the go. Jeff, you and I am sure anyone listening, we're all the same. The worst time to decide what to eat is when you're hungry, when you're ravenous, when you're tired after a stressful day at work, because that's when your emotional mind kicks in and your logical brain is going to take the back seat. That's when you're picking for the chocolate. That's when you're snacking. That's when your snack calories add up to 4, 5, 600 calories. Something else you said there, which is also super helpful, I feel, for anyone, particularly if you're adherence and sustainability. I know this varies per client, but for some people, they are quite regimented on the diet and they do hit the macros. And over a period of time, as Jeff said, that is when fatigue can build up. I found myself at the bodybuilding on a Sunday evening because I knew we trained legs on a Monday. As little as 50 grams of extra carbs, just a small extra serving of rice. It's like you have a new pair of legs the following day going for a walk. So
Yep.
the diet breaks, I think or even just mini refeeds like that, provided that they're structured and not just done off the cuff, they can be super, super effective for or just from a mental perspective, but also for washing off fatigue. Jeff, that's awesome, man. Um,
Well, can
yeah, go
I
ahead, man.
follow up with just a couple more things? I think on that too, we take, we talk about deloads for like training. It's like, to me, these are kind of deloads from dieting as well too, right? So
Deadly, man.
I think they can be super helpful, again, more so from a mental standpoint, but even from a physiological standpoint, I do think they can be helpful, but they're not going to speed up fat loss or anything like that. Unfortunately, right? That would be awesome. Two other things I wanted to go over real quick on this was one thing that helps me, and I'm sure you've done this too, is just having like go-to meals. So like having maybe 1 to 2 meals that are pretty much the same every single day. Again, I know for a lot of people that's like, what? That sounds awful, but man, that can just be super helpful because it just takes the thought process out of it. You can just do it. Again, maybe you don't keep the same meals for a year. Maybe you have like a rotation of like 3 to 5 meals that you kind of
Sure.
rotate through, but at any one time you have two that you're always having. And then maybe you have one meal throughout the day that is something that's a little bit more
I love that idea.
spontaneous and something that's a little bit different because again, man, that's been a game changer for me where it's like my breakfast is 95% of the time the same thing. And then my pre-workout meal is pretty much the same thing. And then I have
Yeah,
like my post-workout meal and my dinner meal that are going to be a little bit different
I like that,
from
man.
time to time, right? And that can be super helpful. And then lastly, on the adherence standpoint, a lot of people think that, they've it's their genetics or something like that. But at the end of the day, or maybe they think their calories are too low or whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, man, it's adherence is going to be the biggest thing here, and that's typically what is causing people to not see the results they want to see is just
Yeah,
adherence. And let me finish this up by saying it's not easy, as you know, right? Like in today's modern world, man, it's tough to stay consistent with your caloric amount, especially the lower it is. So it's not easy. You know, we have tasty foods around that make things really challenging. It's easy to be sedentary. You know, a lot of events that we go to, you know, having a social life usually involves, you know, drinks or food, right? So it is challenging. It's not easy, but you know, adherence typically is the biggest thing. And as you mentioned, you know, with the diet fatigue, as you lose more weight, the longer you diet and the more weight you lose, you know, that diet fatigue is going to start to show up, you know, more hunger, right? So you have that going against you as well too, in combination with all the other things I mentioned. Then on top of it, you know, as the longer we do something, the less kind of like motivate it and the less we want to do it, right?
sure.
So not only do you have all these things pulling you away already, but then the fact that, you know, the longer you do something, you're just not as motivated to do it, right? And we kind of start to take the path of least resistance, and we start to
Yeah,
maybe, instead of measuring things out, now we start to just eyeball it. Or, hey, you know what? I'm just going to have this bag of chips, or I'm going to have these cookies now because I've been doing good, right? And these things slowly start to creep in, and
100%, man.
you know, adherence long term ends up really being a challenging. And unfortunately, you know, to really lose body fat, like you have to be in that consistent calorie deficit over extended periods of time, not just, you know, a week or two. So it is really challenging. But these are all things that can help with that adherence side of things. So
Absolutely. And just a final note on adherence, something that I found when I'm over here in Dubai at the moment, I'm in control of my food environment, and it's very easy for me just Insta shop every week, order the groceries in. I'm in control of what comes in, what goes out. When I flew back home to Ireland for Christmas, obviously being back at home again, being back with my parents and so on, food environment, it just made me realize and reiterate the importance of food environments that Jeff, you and I, we both did PN Precision Nutrition. John Berardi's number one rule was always if a food is in the house, sooner or later it's going to be eaten. So if you don't want to slip, don't go to slippery places. If cookies, if chocolate, for me it's freaking granola, chocolate flavored granola. Oh, I don't do
yep.
moderation with that. If a food is in your house and that's a quote unquote a weakness of yours or it triggers you or causes you to binge eat, look, at least increase the resistance and don't buy it and make yourself walk or drive to the shop if you really, really crave it. Because otherwise, you're just, as Jeff said there, adherence is so important. You're just setting yourself up for failure. Jeff, when it comes to your training, because we spoke a lot about obviously nutrition there, and I know
Yep.
for training, there's no like one kind of perfect workout, whether you want to build muscle or lose fat. There's a lot of principles you can follow. What are some of your principles that you would adhere to from your own personal standpoint and also from a coaching perspective?
Yeah. For training specifically, right? You said,
Exactly, exactly. Like
yeah.
so, we'll say how many sets per body part, how do you go about like exercise selection, rep ranges, and so on?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah. So I like to, you know, if somebody is trying to do a body recomp, right, they want to build more muscle, they want to lose body fat, you know, I think the best thing we can do from a training perspective is make it specific to that goal, right? And so what does that look like? Well, you know, some things you can do to you know, make your training more specific to building muscle would be, I think, like you said, the principles are important. So the first thing that I commonly see that people do kind of mess up on here with this is their intensity of training. Like they train hard, but maybe it's in a way that isn't necessarily taking the target muscle close to failure, right? So they'll maybe overly focus on like the weight that they're doing. So then their technique starts to suffer. So then like other muscles or joints start to take over, right? Or maybe they're just kind of focused on just the burn, you know, with their training there with that. So I think making sure you take the target muscle closer to failure is going to be key. And again, that's where it's not necessarily just lifting more weight. It's not just making it feel tougher. It's, you know, let's say you're doing I'm trying to think of a good, let's say you're doing like a hack squat, right? You know, that's freaking hard. That's a tough machine to use, right? And a lot of times people, you know, they kind of fly through it. They have like a rep range of like 6 to 10, and as long as they're in that rep range, you know, that's the biggest thing. They're not really focused on anything else, and they're not really focused on like the movement that they're doing. It's just, hey, I need to get it from point A to point B. So we
Sure.
can get a little bit more specific by, making sure that you're taking the quad, like ideal, you're probably training the quads in that muscle, in that exercise. So taking the quads close to failure is going to be important, right? So, getting closer to failure is going to look like, hey, things are really starting to slow down. It's getting really
Yeah,
challenging. But at the same time, it's staying focused and it's making sure that you're doing that. Your technique is not breaking down. And that's what gets really challenging for some people there is usually all those things aren't in place, right? Either their technique breaks down or they're not staying focused there with that. So training a little bit closer to failure, but actually taking the target muscle close to failure is kind of one big thing that I really try to push there with that. And that's been a game changer, right? So I think with that, even if you think your form is great, definitely take some videos, double check it to make sure. In saying this, you can definitely overdo technique and overly focus on technique to then
for
where you don't
sure.
ever push it.
Yeah.
So you do want to walk that fine line, right? I'm not saying everything needs to be super slow and you got to feel, you got to have the super good mind muscle connection. Like you do still need to push yourself, right? But I think people can make themselves, they can get their heart rate up, they can get a pump, but they don't actually take the target muscle close to failure enough. So that would be one big thing. Also, like making sure that you are providing some sort of overload over time. So whether you're doing more reps or you're doing more weight, like do make sure you're pushing and you are progressing over time, right? That's a big thing that I see there with a big mistake people make with training to build muscle is maybe they're not logging it or they're just not trying to do more over time. And again, you don't necessarily just have to do more weight every time you go into the gym because that can lead to poor execution and whatnot. But over time, you do want to make sure things improve and you get stronger and you do more reps over time. So those would be the two big ones that I see where people need to improve there. I don't know if you have any follow-ups. If not, I can go into kind of the amount of sets per week, exercise selection, what that looks like and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, everything you said there again, I'm really on par with that. And just as you mentioned there with the hack squat, like really targeting the desired muscle, and that's why obviously you just should know like what the purpose of every exercise in your program or plan is, and the reason that you're doing it. And not every exercise is created equal. Like doing a set of bicep curls to failure is a complete different response to doing a set of deadlifts for failure from both a training and recovery perspective. So you have to like just know your body type, but also exercise specific too. And I saw something funny in as well in the gym, Jeff, and everyone to their own. But there's this girl, she was doing a leg press, angle leg press, and she's with her PT. And I was during my rest, was doing a set of squats. She had like six plates on either side, 620 or 45 pound plates on either side. I'm like, whoa, like she's leg pressing more than
Yep.
I am. And oh, like when you speak about there, like getting that full stretch and taking the muscle through a full range of motion, if I barely classify it as a quarter, like a quarter rep, like it was like the most minimal knee bend, and then she's just pressing it again. So look, sometimes you have to drop the ego at the door, drop the weight, and just really focus on feeding the muscles. You were saying, Jeff.
Well, in that specific example, it's like, what she's doing, like there's probably some sort of adaptation going on. She's probably getting stronger. She's probably, building some
Sure.
muscle in that process, but she's also probably putting a lot of stress on
Yeah.
other joints. And over time, that's just going to lead to not over like it's not going to be as productive as it could be from a muscle building standpoint, right? Because maybe she's going to start to get some pain in her hips, maybe she's going to start to get some pain in her knees over time, which is going to limit what she can do, right? But again, she's also, like I said there in that specific example, like you mentioned, she's putting stress on other muscle groups that maybe should be resting during that period of time, right? And then that's just going to lead to less productive training in other aspects. So like you said, you do kind of need to check your ego at the door here. And if anything, I think finding ways to be able to do less weight, but to get more out of it, really from a
I
long-term
love that, man.
sustainability
Yeah.
standpoint, is a great way to go. Now, again, this doesn't mean, okay, now go do the, 10 pounds for everything and go super light. Like that's not what I'm saying. But
The
if you
tank
can find
dumbbells.
ways, I always have to, with my training, I've been training for muscle growth for 10 plus years now. And like, I still have to like kind of recalibrate my weights, my technique over time. And I always think of it in a positive way because I know that like I'm getting more out of each rep than at that point. Right. So,
Sure.
I think Yeah, really focusing on not just how much weight you're doing is super important. I think with building muscle too, a big mistake I see made is people maybe overly focusing on like training in like the 1 to 5 rep range, maybe like overly focused on just trying to like increase their 1 rep max. And again, I think there's a time and place. And if you like doing that type of training, like really heavy training, like there is a time and a place and you can fit it into a muscle building program. But if that's the only thing you're focused on, I do think that's going to lead to, suboptimal muscle growth
Yeah.
over time. So maybe spending more time in that like 6 to 12, 6 to 15 rep range can be super helpful. And one last thing here too on this before I hand it back to you is I like to work in rep ranges with clients versus like, hey, you need to do 6 reps
Amen, brother.
or right. Because at the end of the day, the rep range is the most important and that making sure you take that target muscle close to failure is most important. And what I see happen a lot of times, if you focus on maybe just 1 rep or just kind of checking the boxes, is a lot of people do end up leaving more in the tank, right? It's like, oh, hey, my program calls for 8 reps. I'm just got to get to 8 reps and that's what I need to do. But then it's like you could have done like 12 reps with that weight. And it's like,
Sure.
well, you're still getting something out of it, but again, we can make it more productive if you worked in a rep range and got a little bit closer to failure there with that.
Amen, brother. Yeah, I really like that idea. And again, it's what you mentioned earlier on too. It's like calorie ranges as well, because some people, if they're told you can only have 2,000 calories a day, they're like, if they go over by 50, they nearly freak out and say, well, I've already eaten 50 extra, I may as well keep going. And, suddenly it's a 3,000 calorie day. But I like that with rep ranges too, but also from the standpoint that sometimes when you go to the gym and maybe you didn't have a great night's sleep and your performance is slightly off, you can feel like somewhat of a failure if you're like, God, I was lifting this weight last week for 8 reps. This week I'm only able to hit 6. Whereas if your program had 6 to 8 rep ranges, you're still within the given or the desired rep range, which means on some days you're feeling it, you can push that bit higher, go for the higher range. But some days, you're lacking sleep, your recovery's not as good. You can still hit the lower range, provided you're within that desired reps. I love that, Jeff. And tell me, when it comes to like sets per body part per week, what would be the optimum amount for someone to aim for?
Yeah. So this is I think a question that people are still trying to figure out, for sure what that is. What I typically end up doing with clients is anywhere between, I would say 6 to 12 is usually the sets per week that we end up getting to. Now, this isn't to say that for some people they go higher, but I think if I were to look over every client's program, I think 6 to 12 is that kind of sweet spot per muscle group, right? And this is direct sets because sometimes you could count like if you're doing back work, you could
Sure.
count that towards biceps. So this is like
Yeah.
direct sets there with that. But instead of chasing a set number, just kind of do the things that I talked about earlier where you're more focused on like finding movements that really fit you best, that you really get a good kind of stimulus that you really like, make sure you're getting closer to failure, make sure you're really focused on your execution and technique. And what I find is you end up being able to do less kind of sets than you think, right? Whereas I feel like people that feel like they need to do really high training volumes, it typically comes down to one of those things kind of being off that we talked about, right? Whether it's an execution standpoint, whether it's maybe not a great exercise for you, maybe you're not pushing close enough to failure, right? Because when you do those things, you end up needing to do a little bit more. Also, rest times too. If you're trying to go super quick with it and maybe you're only resting like 30 seconds in between sets, you are likely going to need to do a little bit more volume there with that. So I think for most people, 6 to 12, but then again, if there is a certain body part that maybe somebody wants to build or maybe isn't as responsive, we may get into the 12 to 20
Yeah.
sets kind of per week there. But I haven't had a lot of situations where anyone's needed to go over that once they kind of fix those things that we
That
talked
we
about
spoke about. Awesome.
initially.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. And Jeff, just for the final 5 or 10 minutes to wrap things up, I'd be curious to hear your take on two things. So first of all, cardio, preferred forms of cardio, and secondly, once we get these amazing results, how do we actually maintain them? But let's start out with the first question, Jeff. What's your
Yep.
preferred form of cardio for someone doing a body recomp?
Yeah. So I like to have clients focus on first like overall activity. So I like to do this via like steps, like having a step count, like tracking that, right? Making sure that their overall activity levels are in where we want them to be, right? Just because, you can work out really hard for an hour, but if you're not really active the rest of the day, it's like, that's good. Like you're still going to again see some sort of adaptation, but that from an overall activity standpoint, not only from an energy expenditure standpoint, but from an overall health standpoint and like appetite regulation, if our overall activity levels are relatively low, those are going to be out of whack, right? So like if you're getting like sub 6,000 steps per day, you might feel a little bit hungrier than you typically would if you maybe moved a little bit more. Whether that's just because you're bored to
Sure,
eat it,
man. Yeah.
you're more likely to eat when you're bored or whatever that may be. But even from like a digestion standpoint, getting anywhere I think between like 6 to 10,000 steps per day is going to help with that. It's going to help with your appetite regulation. You're going to be more likely to eat in line with the amount of calories you're burning. And then just, mental standpoint too, right? It's nice to kind of get some movement in throughout the day, especially, most people do just kind of sit at their desk or on, at their
Yeah.
couch all day. So getting some movement in there. So always make sure that overall movement's there. But this is one thing I have kind of changed my mind on. Is cardio and how it's placed within like a body recomp, changing your body. And my old thought was, hey, we just need to focus on steps, right? And anything extra, just isn't going to be, worth our time, and you're just going to lose muscle and whatnot. But I've changed my mind on this in the last year, where I do see a lot of benefit of, if you have the time to dedicate to this, taking it maybe at least 1 to 2 days per week where you do some sort of cardiovascular activity that is going to kind of get that heart rate a little bit higher for sustained periods of time, right?
Sure.
Not like when you're just lifting weights and you get your heart rate up. We're talking like, hey, you jump on the bike for 30 to 45 minutes and you get that heart rate, not super high, right? Where you're like, you're almost at your max heart rate, but getting it up into your, what people call like their zone 2, zone 3, right? This is usually anywhere from like 130 to 160 beats per minute there with
Yeah.
that, right? So doing that at least 1 to 2 times a week, I have found to be super helpful, not only from an energy expenditure standpoint. You are going to expend energy doing that, but that's not why we're doing it, right? We're not doing it for fat loss purposes. We're doing it from just the overall cardiovascular health standpoint.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking long term here with this. Like, that's going to be great for your long term health. Also, being in better cardiovascular shape is likely going to make your body just more receptive to fat loss, to muscle building. You're going to be able to recover better in between training sessions, in between
For
sets.
sure, man.
And you're going to be able to, your body's going to be better at handling the food that you give it as well too, right? So it's going to, utilize those nutrients to your muscles much better, rather than like storing, just as, fat and stuff like that too. So that's kind of how I've kind of changed my mind on cardio. What I like to do for cardio is something that is low impact. So if you can choose like an elliptical or a bike or something like that, I would prefer that over like say running or something like that. But at the end of the day, if you're programming smartly and you're not overdoing the cardio, I think you're fine with doing whatever you enjoy that's going to get you to stick to it, right? And so,
Love
I
it,
think
man.
a good balance would be, maybe one session a week where it's a little bit longer. It's anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes. And again, maybe it's closer to that zone 2-ish, zone 3-ish kind of range there that I was talking about. And then maybe once a week, if you have the time to get that heart rate up for maybe shorter periods of time, but
Higher
closer to your like
intensity.
higher
Yeah.
intensity, right?
Yeah.
So again, these are going to be shorter bursts there with that, and that can be a good way to kind of get a good spectrum of everything, right? But with the cardio, it's always going to be based on the client's time and what they can dedicate to it. So we don't want it to replace too much weight training, because then we're not going to be able to build muscle like we want in a body recomp, right? So it is time dependent on that. But so I would say order of operations would be, hey, get your weight training, right? We want to make sure we're providing the stimulus that we need to build muscle. And then from there, your overall activity, make sure you're getting enough movement in throughout each and every day. We do that via steps. And then third would be like, hey, if we have time left over, let's try to get some dedicated cardio training in, for overall health and all other things I mentioned there.
Amazing, man. I'm with you on all of that, like literally all of that. And as you said, there's something I found that particularly when you're doing that zone 2 cardio, that your effort, as long as you're not overdoing it and making the goal, keeping the goal. But as you said, your recovery time and the amount of volume you're able to handle, it actually will increase if you have a better cardio base, because you'll be able to, you potentially don't need to rest as long, or at least your heart rate isn't going to be as elevated as long when you've got that like good, really solid cardio base there. I know myself when I'm doing the bike work or when I'm doing a bit of running here and there, my lifts, like if anything improves, provided I'm not overdoing that volume. So I'm absolutely all with you in that. Cardio will not kill your gains, provided you're not
Yep.
overdoing it. Finally, Jeff,
Yep.
because we're just coming up in time here, but uh, for someone who gets these amazing results and they want to keep them now over the summer holidays, what are some practical ways to maintain it?
Yeah. So again, there's a few things that we've talked about that we can kind of tie into this too. So I think the first thing is your methods. Like really, I think people like they look so much at that period of time afterwards because we know that's a challenging time, right? And the research has shown that people can lose weight, but maintaining it is super challenging. I think the first thing we can do here is like, what are your methods during that period of time, right? I think the more drastic the methods are, the
Sure.
tougher they are. That's gonna make it less likely that you're gonna stick to this change over time, right? So I think the first thing is look at the time that during the fat loss, during the body recomp, like what are your methods like? That's going to be the most important. If you're, make sure those are in line with what we talked about today, and that will set you up for a much easier time following, following whatever, fat loss, body recomp, whatever you're trying to do there. Next, make sure you continue to lift weights afterwards, right? Because no matter what, even if you do gain a little bit, it's like, okay, at very least, if you're gaining a little bit of weight, your weight
Yeah.
training still doing the things we talked about. It's like your body's still going to partition some of those nutrients towards adding more muscle. It's not just going to be body fat. Whereas you take somebody that they just stop weight training, they stop staying active. It's like, okay, now you're setting yourself up to not be
To
successful here in this
rebound.
period of
Yeah.
time afterwards. So that would be that. Continue to make sure that you stay active, like we just talked about. Continue to get your movement in. Do some form of self-monitoring, right? You don't necessarily have to continue to track your calories if you want to take a break, but you need to do some form of self-monitoring, whether that's, again, you maybe dial back and just focus on how many meals you eat per day, or maybe you're just tracking your body weight or measurements or progress pictures, but continue to do some form of self-monitoring after that period of time. Again, maybe during your body recomp fat loss phase, we're up here with what we're tracking, but now we're dialing back a little bit what we're doing, but still some form of self-monitoring can be super helpful. Uh, this again kind of goes on the front end of everything, but I like to periodize nutrition with clients, right? So again, maybe we're having a fat loss phase, body recomp phase for 6 to 12 weeks, 12 to 16 weeks, whatever it may be. But then from there, now we're going to go into a phase where we're fueling our body more, giving it enough calories. And then you do that
Love that,
for
man.
an extended period amount of time, and then maybe it's like, hey, I still want to lose a little bit more body fat again, then you go back to that at another time. So making sure that you're not always trying to fat loss diet and like, oh, hey, I'm just continuing to try and get leaner and leaner. Like take some time away from trying to get leaner, and instead fuel your body and really try to improve from that standpoint there with that. So those are the main ones. And then I guess another one would be, if you just after your, say you dropped some weight, really try to be careful with adding in a ton of tasty food afterwards, right? Your body
Yes.
is going to be your body, like at that point, I mean, I'm sure you felt this when you did your bodybuilding show. It's like everything just tastes freaking amazing, and it's like
Yeah.
you're going to have such a tough time if you are like, okay, cool, the diet's over, now I can just go back to eating whatever I want. And again, we want to have some flexibility after that phase, but going too much
Not
on
too
that, too
much.
far on that
Yes.
spectrum, it's like you're going to set yourself up. It's just going to be really hard to moderate your food intake. It's going to be, you're going to end up going super low food volume, really high calorie dense foods. And it's like, you're going to feel like you're eating 2,000 calories, but really you're eating like 5,000. Then you're just going to want to
Yeah.
continue to want more. So, really try to limit how much tasty food you have. Like if anything, like you said, just like you did in your refeeds, just kind of increase the amount of like rice you have, or your diet foods, and then sprinkle in a little bit of tasty food. And as you get further and further away from that,
Exactly. That's when you
then you
can
can
have
start to
more.
increase it.
Yeah.
So
Oh man, Jeff, this has been amazing. Like everyone, if you haven't had a pen and paper, definitely listen back. A ton of value here. Everything from how to calculate your calories, your protein, your macros, some practical ways with your food environment, type of training you're doing, adding good intensity, adding volume, keeping it off long term. Jeff, a ton of value here. For any of our listeners who want to learn a bit more about you or what you offer, Jeff, where's the best place to send them? And then for anyone listening, I'll post all the links in the show notes.
yeah, so I have a few. I'm gonna lead them to three places. So one, my Instagram, Jeff Hoehn _. I'm most active there. I do Q&As a couple times a week, so you can reach out to me there. I have my podcast, the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Like we talked about off air, I post 3 episodes per week, 2
Yeah,
solo,
they
1 guest. And then lastly, I do have a body recomp masterclass. It's that is in my bio on Instagram, or you can just reach out to me on Instagram and I'll send it over to you. And I kind of go over the things we talked about today, so in a little
awesome,
bit
man.
more detail. So
100%, 100%. So I'll post those links in the show notes. So make sure you check out Jeff's socials, check out his podcast. Brilliant podcast. Really enjoyed some of his episodes. And if you're not already doing so, please do subscribe to the Lifestyle Lifter show as well so you don't miss out on our weekly uploads. Jeff, thank you so much for hopping on. This has been amazing, brother. I appreciate you and your time.
yeah, thanks, Adrian, man. It was a great time, great chat. And yep, talk to you soon, man.